Hello, I'm Jason Solomons, and welcome to Movie Talk, our series of in-depth interviews with the finest actors and directors in cinema. My guest on this show is the British documentary maker Nick Broomfield, whose works include Kurt and Courtney, Biggie and Tupac, Eileen Wuornos' Portrait of a Serial Killer, Ghosts, and his latest, which takes us into south-central Los Angeles for the tales of the Grim Sleeper. Nick Broomfield, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us. Lovely to see you. Always nice to see you sort of not on the run.
Well, that's a nice compliment. Thank you, yeah.
In Tales of the Grim Sleeper, your latest film, you had to be pretty sprite because it was quite dangerous territory you were going into South Central Los Angeles.
Well, yeah, although I think the kind of reputation of South Central precedes it, and actually when you get there, they're great people. I mean, before I started the film, I'd sort of lie awake at night thinking, oh my God, I'm going to get shot at, it's going to be terrifying. But when you get there, although there were a couple of incidents, the people are great and they're funny and charming and charismatic.
You go into South Central to sort of find out what happened in this case of Lonnie Franklin.
Basically, between the years of sort of 1982 and 2010, over 200 women disappeared. It was like a kind of mini genocide. So I kind of went in more with the question was like 15 miles from where I live in Santa Monica. How is this possible? You know, this isn't a banana republic. This is the center of LA. How did 200 women disappear? And the guy who gets arrested is caught by a computer. You know, where were the police? What were they doing? What was didn't somebody know something?
I wondered how this was possible.
Hi.
Imagine if they would have treated victim number 3 as if she was a student over at UCLA with blonde hair and blue eyes.
The police don't care because these are black women. It don't mean nothing to them.
What it is really a film about incredible racism and a kind of Los Angeles is a kind of apartheid city, and that's what kind of came out. But I didn't realize that really going in.
When you were doing Biggie and Tupac, it was the story of the kind of bi-coastal kind of warfare. It's a community that you had actually had experience with before.
Yeah, and you know, we obviously Suge Knight comes from around there too. So we'd been there when we were researching him. You know, Compton is part of the whole South Central community. And of course, he and they all grew up in that kind of crack period of time.
It seemed to be one of the kind of big Nick Broomfield kind of skills that this film showcased was your ability to sort of go into places where, you know, normally you would be repelled or it would be dangerous, and you have a kind of a way now of kind of getting their trust quite quickly.
So tell me, do you think that the two murders, the two killings, were connected? Biggie Smalls and Tupac?
My personal opinion again. Yes, I believe they're both connected.
And do you think the same person was responsible for orchestrating the two?
Yes.
When you first started as a documentary, your shorts are more in a kind of social realist British tradition.
Right.
Is that what you thought you would end up doing? Is that what documentaries were to you?
Well, they were. I suppose you learn more from your disasters than you do from, you know, your successes. Few and far between that those have been.
But you wanted to show the apparatus behind the story, and was that because you thought that was the good stuff as well?
Well, I thought
also...
if you roll back the story, you know, and show all the sort of plumbing and the way and the people.
We need to find a place to shoot it. We need to find actors. I mean, it's really like a real film. I mean, not that this isn't a real film, but this is a real film of a different sort.
It's another level of reality.
Right. And if we can't make it work, then we can't make it work. But it seems to me that there's enough interesting stuff which goes along directly with what you're making anyway.
Let me just say, I mean, I find the idea of having, you know, I suppose Joe as a totally fictional character in this situation, as confusing as I did the idea.
Well, it's not fictional. I mean, this isn't fictional. These are real pages.
No. But I mean, injecting Joe into the film is a completely, I think, an arbitrary device.
You know, I think cameras exacerbate a situation and they make people very conscious of what's going on.
So you being in it, in what we now know as the classic Broomfield, you know, mic and the headphones and the T-shirt and the jeans, I suppose. When did you come up with that?
Then I kind of used it. I did it in The Leader, the Driver, the film about the kind of right-wing fascists in South Africa.
Terre Blanche, and his driver, of course.
I'm waiting for Eugene de Blanche, leader of the AWB, the white supremacist party in South Africa, which is preparing itself for war against the blacks. It had been a fairly frustrating week. The leader just didn't seem to be interested in meeting us, and his press liaison officers said I looked like a Turk and should be put in the coloured section of town.
Of course, one of your most famous films, you couldn't get an interview with one of the stars in Kurt and Courtney because Kurt was obviously not there anymore.
Right.
So you were chasing a ghost in a way.
You know, sometimes these films change, and that particular, the Kurt and Courtney film started just as a film about Kurt Cobain and his musical influences. I like Nirvana's music, and you met these incredible bands like, bands with names like Napalm Beach, who were in Portland, who were completely broke, and they were breeding rats, and the whole place was full of these pet rats that, like crazy stuff. And then I realized that Courtney was calling up all these bands saying, if you talk to this guy who I've not agreed to making the film, you're never going to do this, that, and the other again, and threatening them and calling the BBC up.
It's not easy for me to tell you that, my head of programming basically asked me to bow out of the project.
And what kind of...
You know, as I mentioned, it was concerns from our colleagues at MTV, because of their relationship with Courtney and Nirvana and everything else. So I think we're gonna have to bow out, and I extremely regret having to tell you this, but there's nothing I can do.
It became a story really about freedom of the press and the way in which you're very limited often in the United States as to what stories you can tell, because so many of these big corporate entities have so many conflicting interests. So that's kind of what the film ended up more being about, with obviously Courtney being a fairly active presence in it too. I mean, she just made, in a sense, she made the film because she was such a bully that she kept creating more and more drama.
But, Courtney, why have you personally, threatened journalists in the past?
Have I threatened them?
Yeah.
Well, because it's my right to do it. It's not against the law, but it doesn't mean I'm going to take them to court unless they lie. Don't lie.
But I mean...
And when I was really young, I didn't know that, I was weird. I grew up with hippies, so I never knew that, I was bugging anybody. So when I kind of got crap for it, it freaked me out. But I don't want to talk about it, because I'm so happy.
Famous as she was, being famous for her work in Hole or whatever as a personality, but your film sort of made her even more famous.
Even more infamous.
Yes.
Well, she then did me it was dubious honor of being one of the few films thrown out of Sundance. I sort of was having a Mexican meal with some friends and my phone rang and it was page 4 from the New York Post saying, how does it feel to be thrown out of the Sundance Film Festival? This was 3 days before the festival opens. I was like, what, have I really been? And they said, yeah, we just heard. But I was actually on the jury that year. So I went up to Sundance anyway, and we staged this sort of midnight screening in the Moose Lodge in Sundance, which actually turned out to be the sort of hot ticket because everyone wanted to see the film.
Notoriety became a sort of bit of a thing. Notorious Big, obviously, Big and Small, and the notoriety of Courtney Love, but then Eileen Wuornos.
Originally, I was offered a series on serial killers, and I kind of read through them all. They were all, it was Jeffrey Dahmer and blah, blah, blah. And the only one who was really interesting was Eileen, because it was the only woman who was actually killing men rather than men killing women. And she had a whole different kind of story.
Two things you're going to have to do. You're going to have to get the public to believe that she's a serial killer, and you're going to have to get her convicted in order to get this movie to go.
We're going to be in Ocala over the next couple of days. And we'll try and ask the police their involvement in it.
Good.
And then we'll come back and see you again on Tuesday.
And then it was really to do with, when I called up her lawyer, he said, well, if you give me $30,000, you can interview Eileen Wuornos. And I thought, well, isn't there the Son of Sam law, which is supposed to prohibit you from making money from the crimes that you've committed? So that was I thought he sounded so crazy, and that was kind of my reason for making that film. It was kind of like, about, and it was called Selling of a Serial Killer. It was all about the money that people were making from the books and so on.
Because it's territory you visited twice, but different themes in both of the movies.
The second one was very much about her, because we'd had probably like a 14-year relationship one way or another, and I had tried to get her some decent lawyers, but Eileen had a way of falling out with nearly everybody and having a terrible choice of people to defend her. So that hadn't really worked out. But then she wanted to do her last interview with me, and it was kind of a responsibility. But nonetheless,
nobody ever asked me these questions.
Whether the cops were following you or not, Eileen.
Oh, whether the cops are following me or not, Eileen, what?
Let's say the cops were following you.
Yeah.
Let's say they were following you and they did everything that you're saying they did. Nonetheless, you killed 7 men.
Yes, you did.
And I'm asking you, what got you to kill the 7 men?
And I'm telling you, because the cops let me keep killing them, Nick. Don't you get it?
You did move into, I suppose, more conventional filmmaking, but taking obviously your documentary techniques into a film like Ghosts and The Battle for Haditha. And Ghosts, I think, which is an extraordinary film.
Ghosts and Battle for Haditha were both mainly using real people acting themselves. So it wasn't that massive a departure from documentary, and where they were shot very much in continuity. So the story would progress and people could grow into their characters, and they were pretty much acting themselves.
The Morecambe Bay disaster kind of made public this kind of secret that everyone knew, that there was this undocumented labour and that it was rife in Britain and
That's what
across
amazed
Europe.
me. I couldn't believe it. You know, when I read 25 Chinese people had died in Morecambe Bay, I thought, how on earth? You know, what is this story about? How did they come to be in Morecambe Bay? I was completely outraged, but then you realize that obviously all these big groups know about it, and there isn't enough pressure for them to change it. You know, and the trade union movement, I guess, has been pretty much closed down.
When you went to cover the war in Battle for Haditha, that was, again, a different genre.
Haditha obviously was a real incident that happened, and there have been lots of conflicting stories about it. And there seem to be 3 main stories. One was the story that the American military, the Marines, was putting over. The other was the story that the resistance fighters in Haditha were putting over. And the other was the story that you were getting from the people who lived in Haditha, who were sort of caught in the crossfire. I guess it's the complete opposite to American Sniper. And I suggest, you know, if anyone really wants to see what it's like in Iraq, look at Battle for Haditha, because American Sniper is like, could have been made on Mars.
Well, there were quite a lot of films that were American films that were sort of similarly pessimistic and similarly doubtful about the truth.
And they all did really badly.
No one went to see those either.
No, they went, yeah. Maybe that's telling us something.
Does your general demeanour and the general kind of tenor of your film seems to suggest that there's hope still?
Well, I think there is hope, and I think a good dose of humour is what you need, because, you know, the human condition is mainly a humorous one. I'm always amazed at how many ridiculous things people do, you know, and how funny they are, and the way they survive with their situation is generally through humor too. You know, people are full of the most wonderful contradictions. What is so wonderful about documentary is you don't really know what's going to happen. It's a spontaneous thing. Your attitudes to people change. Very often when you go into a film, the person you most dislike becomes your best friend by the end of it. And you can take an audience, I think, through that movement. And I think by not having a script, by not having a whole lot of preconceptions, you can make much, much better films.
Absolutely. Well, it is great to see you still jumping around various dangerous places, and for Grim Sleeper, which is gripping all the way and full of fantastic characters. Well, it's worked very well. Fantastic to see it again.
Thank you.
Nick Broomfield, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
You need an alibi.
Why do you want to come back to CSI?
The job is in my blood, because it always will be.
Oh, God, there's a body in there!
Who died?
Everybody.
A killer who decorated the scene of the crime. I bet he kills again.
Do you know what the holy trinity of crime solving is? Means, motive, opportunity.
Now, killers always leave a trail. Just have to find it.
Blood evidence always tells a story. This one's got a strange twist.
I kind of feel like there's something you're not telling me.
I think we're going to enjoy working together.
Brand new CSI Vegas starts Wednesday at 9, exclusive to Alibi.